There's a question that everybody needs to be asking. It's an obvious question, is why is bitachon not binary? You either believe or you don't believe. You either rely on a Kadosh Baruch Hu or you don't rely on a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Why is it that it's not binary? And I just would like to share an interesting angle on this question that Rav Yerucham Levovitz writes in Das Torah at the beginning of Parshas Vayelech. He says that there's a famous story, so to speak, an anecdote that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter used to tell, which was always understood as making fun of people. The story goes that they go over to this person and ask him, tell me, is Ruvain a trustworthy, reliable person? And he says, yes, very much so. And he says, well, even we can trust him even to repay a loan. Like you could give him a loan and trust him to repay it. And he says, absolutely. And then they say, oh, well, he needs a couple thousand ruble loan. Will you lend him the money? And suddenly he hesitates. So the standard interpretation of Rabbi Yisrael is that he's poking fun at us, that the person wasn't being authentic when he first answered, and he was caught in his inauthenticity by when they asked him if he would lend him the money. And Rav Yerucham wants to suggest that that's not the case. He suggests that a person is made up of two parts, and what he refers to one as Shamayim Mima'al and the other as Aretz Mitachas. So if we would look at the pasuk, that we need to know Ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim mima'al v'ala aretz mitachas ein od. And he says that we're only dealing with one world. If we're only dealing with one world, what's the b'shamayim mimal and the aretz mitachas? And he says that the answer is that there's a part of us that believes absolutely. If you walk around and you say to yourself, do I not believe that Hashem created the world? But I think that Zeus created the world. And everybody gets the answer right. He says that is not false. That is a truth, but it's a truth when the person has no stress associated with it. It's from the kalos. It's easy. There's another truth where it is kashet, where the person has stress, and there it can be a 100% kofar. Same person. We walk around with two people inside us. A shamayim mima'al, where truth and clarity reigns, and there's a aretz mitachas, where the opposite reigns. And that's why we have very often, you can have Moshe Rabbeinu referred to as B'chol Beisi Ne'emanhu and Yan Lo Ha'emantem Bi. You failed to have Emunah. And he says, Rabbi Yisrael's not telling us that we're all duplicitous. He's saying that there's a truth without any stress, and there's a truth with stress. When the stress is that I might lose a pile of money, then that stress slips below this person's line, and there's no two people that have the same dividing line between Shamayim Mima'al and Aretz Mitachas. Every person has it differently. Some you might refer to it in Rav Dessler terms as a line of scrimmage between Koach HaBechira, but however you're going to refer to it, there is two truths going on in the person, and they are continuous. They're operating all the time. And so a person who gets irritated, for example, at somebody for having done something, and you say, don't you believe that it's all from the Ribono Shel Olam? How did you get irritated or upset at a person when you know that it's all from Hashem? And the answer is, what do you mean? Look what he did. Wait a second. What happened to the professing of belief in a Kadosh Baruch Hu that you saw before? And the answer is because that was kal, and this is kasha, and they are not contradictions. I guess you could call it contradictory when the two parts of a person are at odds with each other, but there is a lifelong process of v'yodato hayom v'hashevosa el levavecha, where we take the clarity that we have intellectually, and that clarity, that intellectual clarity, carries us to a certain degree of response to things that are happening in our lives or that happened in our collective lives. And there we see it as being the Yad Hashem without question. And the other things where they're the kasha, where there's stress and the process of working it down from what we know, I would call that in the level of the kalos, that which is clear to us. Rav Yerucham, when he makes this distinction, he talks about the distinction. He doesn't talk about the process. Process he addresses elsewhere. I'm suggesting that the process, as the Balei Musar would always refer to it, is the process of v'yodato hayom v'hashevosa el levavecha, of knowing something and then bringing it down to your heart. The bringing it down to your heart is impacting the aretz mitachas. The impact is that the clarity has now permeated a place where before it would have not been. There's a place where before I would have gotten irritated, or I would have ignored it, or I would have just jumped to strategize. And now I recognize that it's part of my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. How does it work? It's a continuous process of clarifying on the level of Yodato Hayom. So it's going over truths that are clear to us, that we've learned, that have been presented in the Torah, things that we know on a very intellectual level, and all of that is going to help on a certain level. Every piece of Torah, every piece of understanding about Hashem and about Hashgacha helps to a certain extent. What certain extent is that? He's calling that Shamayim Mimal, that we won't fall into crazy kfira. What happens when it gets down to our heart? So there the person can be a full-fledged denier, a full-fledged kofar, a denier of the providence of Hashem. So this complexity of a human being, excuse me, this complexity is something that everybody struggles with. And if they take one or the other as being the defining, excuse me, if they take one or the other as being definitive, here's who I am. I am my clarity, or I am my kfira, you'll get it wrong. And that's what people tend to do. They tend to assess themselves based on either that which they've already gained as clarity, or they assess themselves based on their rejection, on their kfira, which is very disheartening. And the steps require that we have two parts of the story, and we must know that both of those parts are true. They are both parts of me. I am both a believer and a kofar. See, that seems like a difficult thing to imagine about a person. How can I imagine that about myself? That I'm both a believer and a kofar? And the answer is because they're both true. One is Vashamayim Mimal, and the other is Al Haaretz Mitachas. The process is a continuous process of clarification to move the boundaries of the Shamayim Mimal into the Haaretz Mitachas, so that more parts of us are under the dominion of that which we know and have clarity on. Lifelong process, never stops as long as we're alive. And it seems as though some trace of the Haaretz Mitachas is always going to remain for us as part of our ongoing work. But that's the work. And so if somebody asks you, are you a believer? The answer is yes, I am a believer, and I am also a kofar. Well, how do you know that you're both? Because there are times when I get the answer right, and I get the response right, and the response is a clear recognition that Hashem is the guiding hand behind the events in my life and in the lives of Klal Yisrael. And how do you know you're a kofar? Because I get irritated, angry, start strategizing, anything but thinking that this is the hand of Hashem and turning to Him as the event goes down. So we have a new answer now to the question, are you a believer? The answer is yes, I am a believer, and I'm also a kofar. And that is my life mission. My life mission is to inch my way from belief to moving it into the area, to expanding the range of Shamayim Mima'al, so that the Haaretz Mitachas has less dominion over my being, and I become increasingly a Shamayim Mimal person.